Today is July the 6th, and I hope everybody had a good 4th and a good weekend. We are actually unexpectedly local today. I was going to go to Vermont this weekend, but the weather up there is about the same rainy mess we had down there, or up down here, so we're going to do a run down here into an area I haven't been into in a few months, looking for signs of activity. And we'll see what goes on from there, and we'll see what we talk about. There's some technical updates to give on things as I progress with them, and there's also thinking of any fodder from the rumor mill, but I don't really know that there's much from that. But we'll cover what we can, or otherwise just do the field thing and see what happens. Let's move along, see what we find, and we'll see where we end up. Thanks. Even though they didn't ban the existing ones, they always reserve the right to do so in the future. One more reason why people hate the federal government, but that is what it is. One sec. Ooh, what is that? Heron flying off. And while we didn't get him on film, every now and then you get a moose in here too, and that still looks like it's flooded to the point of not being walkable. It used to be. But you also have the Chinese end of the equation also deciding suddenly they don't want to support older phones when they used to, for no reason other than apparently just because. So we, the casual hobby drone owners, are fucked again for reasons beyond our control other than basically just because. And that is frustrating. So my drone fleet is right now a mix of a DJI Spark, which is the oldest drone of the mix, a DJI Mavic Mini first run, which is the one that is under the weight class of the FCC's meddlings and therefore not their concern. So it is right now. Again, they reserve the right to fuck with us later. And Lord knows that's a lovely thing, but rather than test the walkability of that, I'm just going to take the moose trail up here along the ridgeline instead. Because that looks like it's waiting. And waiting only, so it is what it is, and doesn't look like the flooding ever got over itself, but you're in the middle of nowhere, so it's actually not really that surprising. Bucky Beaver last year got very enthusiastic in his indulgences and has his swimming pool still in good working order, so we'll get to the meadow over beyond here and see if it's something we can get out onto or if it's all swampy and not passable, because they said it's, the lady at the convenience store on the way up here had said it's been dry up here, so if so, we have a fighting chance of that. If not, we'll have to see when we get over and around some terrain here. This one is one of what I call the bigger areas, so you got to kind of work with the terrain. But yeah, so the DJI thing is now obviously not going to be sustainable in the long term because they just, between the Chinese end of the equation and the FCC, what do? They make every time you make an update to the app, you break your phone again. Now, last time I was able to clear out the data on the cache, but that means you have to remember to log back into their app to be connected in order to do all that, because the FAA and the Chinese government want to know all your flight data, and that's how the legal part of that works. It is what it is.
My other drone is a very inefficient, more toy than anything else, a Potensic, I forget, D20 I think it is. It's an older one. It's got a fixed mount camera, so it's not really good for actual aerial photography anyway. So that leads me to be in a place where I don't want to be now, which is either A, change my filming habits, or B, get a new drone. Which, I gotta kind of navigate this real quick. It's probably good that I moved to the hands-free camera, because having to do this with the gimbal is not gonna work. But which leaves the options. DJI, unfortunately, is probably going to prove to be a no-go. Mainly due, stupidly, to fucking politics. And that's a really stupid reason for your hobby to be disrupted. But again, this is why I have a happy dislike of the federal government, because where they don't need to have their nose, they do. As a result, if I get down here without killing myself, I kind of like, I'm stuck with where do we kind of go from here? And the answer more than likely is going to be some kind of a Potensic or a Holy Stone drone, because the American-made market, which is really the most galling part of this, is I'm sure that somebody from the U.S. government would love to say buy American, but all your American-made drones are these big, massive, freaking search and rescue sensitive, law enforcement using big, massive, non-foldable fucking things that are not under anywhere near $1,000, and the cheapest option for that would be a Skydio, and Skydios are overpriced. So basically, the consumer is getting effed by two different directions, and it's old. It's frustrating, but it is what it is. So if I'm going to continue to have drones as a means of content making, I hate using the word content creation, because it's not a job, it's a fucking hobby. And for all the little Gen Z people out there that would have you believe, this is my job, I'm a content, no you're not, you just run around with a camera doing whatever you do. It's not a job. If you figured out a way to turn it into a side hustle where you reliably get paid, all the power to you. Don't get me wrong. In the meantime, let me find the way down, which is least likely to get me fucking killed. I come down there, probably the most even, but that is a steep little drop, and I'm going to have to trust this tree not to be a loose little betrayer of my safety, and I'm going to have to use that as a brace to get down to this log and switch over to this fucker that just almost screwed me, and then I can maybe do a very careful scramble down the hill very, very carefully. Otherwise, I go down and I fuck myself up, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, all bustigated, and that's not a good thing, but I'm down. So, if you hear me harping about drones in a video, it's because it's become a sore spot, and again, mainly politics, which is bullshit. Governments sticking their fucking nose in the affairs of people's lives. Not granted on a hobby basis, so it's not life or death, but it doesn't help perceptions either. You got a president. Nope, I'm not going into politics. No, we're not going to go there. We'll leave that be. And we're going to find a way across, because we got to hop over there in the next leg of our journey. I haven't been gone so long that I've forgotten how this is done. But Yeah, that irritates the shit out of me for no good reason. So while we're ranting, and we'll get this out of the way before we get into the better bits of the scenery and note the moose tracks. Probably jump right here. If not, we can jump right over. You know what? I'm going to jump over there. Because the boundaries of this are kind of undefined. Not as bad as I'm making it out to sound, maybe. So if I can push off of this, I can do that. Never mind. We're good. Now we're going to get up into this stuff because it's drier. My feet will get wet soon enough. And so the other bit of news, this is Facebook news. We have, I haven't seen his podcast yet, but Steve Kulls is talking about the darker side of critical thinking, which I suspect I know what his line of conversation is. I'll go up around here. But some mixed feelings based on what I'm going to get into myself. I recently, as I said, well, I lingered for a bit. Maybe longer than I should have, but I lingered in the Bigfoot Believers group for a few weeks for kind of a Jane Goodall project, studying the ways of its inhabitants. I'll be nice and not call them chimps, but they call it believers because they literally fucking believe everything. No filter. So as opposed to Cole's likely rant about scoffdicks, which is not critical thinking, that's a different matter. And there's a predatory side to it too that leads them to be disingenuous in some cases. You also have the opposing side, and I frankly got sick and tired of the group, not necessarily because of the brazen nonsense there every day, although that certainly didn't help my perceptions. It was the matter that you had every day these idiots are trying to lure you into a chat group for, I'm just going to say the reasons seem to be sketchy, as in like scam related shit. And everything else was either AI generated nonsense being portrayed as real shit, or a rehashing of every proven bit of Bigfoot related bullshit that we've already covered. And I'm sorry, I'm bored with that stuff. So there are two groups out there in what I'm going to mockingly call the Believer, BLEEVRS category, that are useless to anyone who actually gives a rational thought to this phenomenon, which otherwise is fascinating. And that is that they portray anything and everything as plausible, believable, or fact, when in fact you've got these idiots, some of whom very likely are brazen hoaxers or people with some very likely, and hold on, I'm going to check this because it's a known muddy area. You got moose tracks, but you might have other tracks too, so bear with me for a sec. This is what I'm looking at. All moose tracks from the look, though. And I'll have to remember where I step on the way back should I see something that looks sort of kind of like a track like that, even though that's probably a moose double step. Since you only have one track looking like that, and it would look like a boot, but you know, I'm going to take it. No, actually, look at this. This is photo worthy. That's definitely moose shit, though. The other people very likely have some element of mental health issues. And that probably sounds very condescending to some, but honestly, mental health as it relates to Bigfooting is probably a long overdue study that would not help the cause towards proving the existence of, but it would rule out a whole lot of nonsense that doesn't help the cause. So, now I just took a picture of the track, and I'm going to bet, I'll bet you $10 American right now that when I post that, somebody is going to just naturally assume that's a Bigfoot track, and I'm going to have to say, no, that's a very likely moose double step. But people want to believe. It's one of the greatest detriments to the subject today, and it's annoying. Doesn't help a bleeping thing. So far, it doesn't look like this area has been overly beaten on by the rain, so we might be able to get in here and have a look about and get to the backside, which is a little bit further out, which is a good thing if that does prove to be the case. You're going to get your feet anyway, so I've already accepted that. That's just the nature of doing this. So, but yeah, I'm not going to be mocking them anymore because I think the point's been made, and they, even though I have quit the group, I've been too lazy to block it altogether, and I'm still getting those goddamn chat invites. And I'm not going in there. I've even gotten to the point where I mock them. They're like, come join our chat. No, you can't make me. They try anyway. Which basically means, from a technical perspective, it's a bot. It's automated. And the fact that it's an automated chat room just makes it seem all that much more sketchy, because the people they're preying on are the gullible end of the Bigfoot spectrum, which are people that are probably very quickly parted with their money without a lot of effort on the part of the people trying to part them from their money. I remember this part. This part is always tricky. Easiest way is usually around the tree, which is always a mud fest, which is always fun. Not that I've ever done this before. But let's try to keep to the edge of the mud. It doesn't seem that bad, actually. Because from last year, I remember it was actually ending up being drier than it looked. Looks like that crappy mud that tries to steal your boot from suction, because it's just such yucky crap, but not so much. Anyway, we're done with them, and probably overdue. The Jane, but if you read my bio on my Facebook page, it does say, or my Facebook wall, it does say, studier of the Bigfoot community. So yes, I'm watching you guys too. You are a willing or unwilling participant in my observational study of this weird and wacky subject. And no, I don't need a waiver from you to do it. It's called the First Amendment. I see you doing wacky shit, I have a right to comment. It's called fair use. Which has, by some, admittedly been abused, daringly. But, regardless, I'm wondering if I should actually address something with him. I don't know if he watches my stuff or not. If he doesn't, that's perfectly fine. It keeps us from getting into any kind of needless conflict, but I had heard a rumor that he had mentioned me in an interestingly defamatory way not so long ago, and I decided to ignore it, but I wonder if I should make a statement of some kind. I will. So, Darren, I don't know who told you what, but if you look at my actual YouTube channel and you look at the dates, and you're a technical guy, so you can probably do this, and you verify the timestamps on the dates, you're able to verify, if you care about honesty, the fact that I was not, in fact, a patient in a psych ward for a matter of weeks, because that would violate the logic behind the dating data of my actual YouTube channel. I don't know who told you that. I don't know why they told you that. I don't know if you're trying to stir shit. I also don't care past the point, but all I'm going to tell you is, if you're pushing that kind of a narrative, you are going to make yourself look silly, because it isn't the case. And I've been in contact with enough people on the outside that I can pretty much prove that I was not in that sort of a situation. And right now I'm going to shut up and gauge the swampy factor of my entry onto the first meadow, which is going to be soggy, but it's a matter of, when this thing's been soaking up water all week, it becomes a wee bit more dicey than just soaking your socks for a bit. Because otherwise it's a dry day and they will dry out as soon as you hit the dry spots. And as far as anyone wondering about ticks, permethrin. It is your friend. The material these pants are made out of isn't really the most conducive thing for them to cling to, and little known fact about ticks, they tend to operate in the 1 meter and below realm of things. And in a meadow of tall grass, that's really all they really have to work with. But I do check myself as well. I'm not that cocky about it, for obvious reasons. Since I have a police harness on to keep the police body cam going as realistically steady as I can, and for those that don't remember, we're heading over that way. There is another meadow around that corner too, but it's fairly small, and its interior is this, so track detection is meh at best. This is actually proving to be pretty dry so far, but we're coming up on a spot where there is a sneaky little stream hiding in the tall grass that, should you not know or pay attention, could do a lack of favor to your ankle or something if you were to misstep and hyperextend it or something. As a matter of physical forest ninja coaching, I guess is as good a term as any. But we're going to make our way over here, because getting to the perimeter of the meadow is the easiest way to make it to the next piece of the bow tie. Also, if you look at this thing on a map, there's your stream. Or no, that's a hole. Never mind. The stream is here. And you just got to find where to jump it. And not... because you can't really tell how deep that is. But if you don't go in, you don't find out, and you don't fuck up your knee. Because a couple years back, not here, kind of on my way to a spot way the hell over there, I did misstep, and I messed up my knee. And although I made it back, doing so did suck, needless to say. So I don't like to repeat mistakes. But in spite of the fact that I have been open to discussing matters relating to mental health while on camera, I have been also fairly transparent about it, meaning if I had spent time in a ward, I probably would actually share the experience for the benefit of others who may have need to go, because despite the feelings of some, the stigma of going to a place like that really isn't what it once was. And I have physically been in a psych ward because I did IT in a hospital setting that had one. And the nature of my duties did occasionally bring me into that space. And I can say from that experience, never once did I feel threatened by the patients or the situation. And the only time I ever had an issue with that space in that job capacity was actually with the front desk staff, who, if there is a problem in that environment, at least in this particular case, was basically a matter of those two individuals. And we'll leave that for a story as a story for another day. But as far as my own experience with mental health, never been to a ward. I don't feel the need to go. Without getting into her personal details, I live above somebody who has had an overnight stay in the psych unit at the emergency room for anxiety related whatnot. But still somebody who is neither violent, dangerous, or anyone you would ever really have to worry about, because people that have anxiety are usually more introverted, and therefore, if they were going to hurt anyone, it would be more likely themselves, unfortunately, which is the first thing you would say to land yourself in a psych ward and not have a choice in the matter, because that's the first thing they ask you. In fact, at my most recent doctor's visit, they brought back that script, the mental wellness survey, they call it, but basically they're asking you, have you ever thought of unaliving yourself or anyone else, or doing harm, and all these other questions pointing to anxiety, depression, and all this. And the forewarning I would give anyone who calls themselves more honest than they should be, and this has happened to a few people that I've read about anyway, so that's where this cautionary tale comes from, for citation of source. Also, to the deer fly, they just landed in the middle of the back of my neck. If you bite me there, it's going to be my mission for the rest of the day to see that you are no longer alive. And you're a bug, so that doesn't land me in a psych ward. So I'm trying to find a spot here that's not all soggy, and I'm not succeeding. It's more the matter of minimizing the soggy, really. But again, you come here, you're going to get wet. And shit happens. It's more a matter of just finding a path of least resistance, which in some spots is somewhat easier said than done. Like, I don't know how much of a sink fest this is. It's not bad. So, but getting back to the survey, do bear in mind in a medical setting that if you say yes to any of these, even if you attempt to lend context, and the example I cite comes from one of the Carolinas, but a guy was hit with this question, and his answer was not yes. It was, yes, I used to when I was younger as a child, and he was well into his 40s. The doctor attempted to turn that into a 3-day observational stay in the psych ward anyway. And my suspicion is that the way the law is written in some states, as in not so much a matter of the people being that freaking stupid, but being obligated by certain mandatory reporting laws. The wording of the law does not potentially give them a lot of leeway in their judgment, and they will be forced to try to hold the person. And what ended up happening, and interestingly enough, this was a tutorial or a a testimonial from a lawyer's office. So this became a civil matter, and I don't think the guy won. But while he was still there and in possession of his phone, he threatened to call 911. Or say they were trying to basically medically kidnap him, which is actually a thing, believe it or not. Google it and you'll be a little more enlightened to that. It's basically you say you don't want medical treatment and they decide they're going to treat you anyway, and they don't ask. And if you are otherwise of sound mind, even if you're making the dumbest decision ever, but you're otherwise competent, guess what? They can't do that. Not legally anyway. The flip side of that being, and I think I probably brought this up more than once, because there was a time, believe it or not, back in 2004 when I actually found myself in a situation approaching that, and it would have been exactly that. The problem is cops that bring you down there under the pretense of the Community Care Act or something like that are covered as Good Samaritans. So your legal recourse against them is basically non-existent, and doctors acting in that capacity, basically the same thing. Your recourse for being falsely imprisoned in a hospital, even if you're like there for a week in a psych ward and you lose your job and all that, don't let yourself be there, because you're basically screwed. And I'm thinking down there is probably the easier way to go, but we didn't do that. Because once you're there, you're kind of screwed, and you don't really have a lot of recourse afterwards. You can threaten to sue, and I'm sure that you're up against two things in that time, and I don't know why I'm delving off into this subject, but we're going to finish my point just because mild OCD on my part. My upper body is sweating profusely because of the harness around my police camera, and the my bottom half is absorbing all the lovely swampy nutrients of moisture. So it is what we're having, a soggy day, man. Anyway, if you were to threaten litigation and all that, number one, the doctor's probably heard it before and knows all about the Good Samaritan thing, and he's probably going to win. Number two, you can grab some higher ground. Depending on how belligerent you get, you're probably not helping your ability to portray yourself as a rational, calm adult to a person who may well have the doctor's often God complex. I've worked for a doctor or two, and one of them most definitely, aside from being a bit of a psychopath, definitely did have a bit of a God complex, because they're a surgeon. How dare you question them? And when I say that, I literally mean pick a subject. They're a surgeon, they know everything, even when they don't. When it came to technical matters, she was often dangerously stupid. So on a more personal note, fuck you, Julie. If you're out there and you're watching this for whatever reason, fuck you. And 13, 14 years later, my feelings really haven't changed that much. You suck. Anyway, that's the thing. But from their standpoint, at least from the words of a nurse friend of mine who's an APRN, who actually can commit somebody and get away with it, provided they have psych training, although they're probably still going to win in court. It's a matter of liability to them, and they're a mandatory reporter, and the way they look at it, even if they're wrong, they're risking their certification as a nurse if they don't opt on the side of nanny statism. I'll put it that way, because that's how I kind of feel about it. But that's why when I was asked all those questions, I basically gave a blanket no to all of them, and then just waited for her to move on to the next subject. Like, I came here for my physical. I do not need medical help of a mental health nature. And when I did have one time in my life when I kind of wanted somebody to talk to about some shit, I sought out an actual therapist. And in that case, I will say this: therapy does not come with stigma. It is helpful. It is a conversation. It is nothing more. You're talking about the shit that bothers you. And a lot of times your conversation with that therapist, when it's a slow day, is just having a bullshit session where you're talking about day-to-day stuff. And it becomes more like they're a friend of yours and you're just talking over a beer at the bar or something. Which is not anything. There's nothing wrong with it, is my point. And it does. So before, as much as I'm dwelling on psychological shit, my advice, honestly, at least as somebody who's been to therapy, is if you feel that you have changes going on in your life that are not healthy and you feel psychological, therapy is how you handle that before it gets so far away from you that you find yourself in a ward. Because the minute you are in the ward, number one, it's gone too far. Number two, it is a fair argument that you have lost control of the situation to a level where you actually may need to be there. The problem is, once you're there, you lose a lot of control over your personal liberty. And depending on your personal level of wealth, income, and what you can afford for care, depends on the nature of the situation that you end up in. In my own home state of Connecticut, you have two places that are like higher end, privately run, and not quite a spa, but the point is, these are for people that have the money to afford to go there, and there you'll get decent care because it is privately run. And the people that go there generally are known to be able to afford it, or they have spectacular insurance that can afford it. In either way, that's the ideal for somebody in need of that kind of care. The rest of it, unfortunately, is either hospital psych ward stuff or state-run hospitals, and those are a crapshoot. If you read the reviews of these things, which do come up when you're looking for a therapist, just so you're, in case you're wondering why I would know this, the typical reviews are, the majority of them aren't that good. Not so much physical abuse or that kind of thing, more like apathy and neglect. So what's the point of going for help if they're not going to give it to you? Because the thing about the psych ward is they're not there to treat your psychological problems. They're there to stabilize you. The premise behind that basically being this: you came in because a doctor, your friend, your family, yourself, a cop, saw you acting in a manner where they thought you were in crisis, i.e., at imminent risk of hurting yourself, possibly suicidal, that kind of thing. Or you're not on your psych meds. If you're on psych meds, wouldn't know, never been on any, never needed any to my knowledge. And you are acting, for lack of a better word, monkey shit. And you end up there in a manner where you basically are either A, and this does happen too with B, so listen closely to B. A, they bring you in, and you are there for a 72-hour hold, which means the next 3 days of your life belong to the people that are keeping you there. You may not want to be there, you may kick and scream. The law says you're staying in if you escape. That kind of changes the scenario to a potential fugitive thing where, depending on your circumstances, it will dictate how hard they will attempt to find you and bring you back, willingly or otherwise. That opens up to a whole nother subject level of conversation, but I love being out here because there's no one here. It's just you and your thoughts and maybe a moose or a Bigfoot or two. Which, despite what Sasquatch Chronicles would have you believe, really are not that aggressive if you're not there to actively bother them. Much like 99% of the freaking larger wildlife out here. And yes, including black bears. Which I haven't run into in this stretch of woods, but I have in other parts of this greater national forest environment. So the first 3 days of your stay, you're staying because they said so. And that is you don't have to like it, but the reality is they can keep you there and your recourse is non-existent. The third day, however, is where things become more tricky. They have a determination to make whether or not, A, they feel like you are stable enough to go home with some kind of a treatment plan, more likely than not, and some kind of outpatient follow-up thing that I don't know. So if they give you that, the outpatient thing, and you don't follow it, I have no idea if they follow up or they leave that on you, and just expect you to come back if you don't follow it. But otherwise, they have to go to the court and they have to get a short-term hold by way of the order of a judge. And that makes the whole thing a civil proceeding where the judge comes to the hospital. They tell their side. If you're opposed, you tell your side, and everybody brings witnesses, and then the judge decides. But that usually is probably going to go in favor of the medical people, because unless you sound completely coherent, the judge is probably going to be biased towards the person with the medical opinion and or the badge. And when this almost happened to me, that would have been what I was up against. Now, I was not on anything. I was completely sober and coherent. What I was up against, however, was a badge. So you get to the hospital and the cop tells them one thing and you insist all you did was oversleep. My crapshoot at that point would have been, am I able to keep my calm long enough and steady enough to convince them that no, I don't need to be here and I really don't want to be here. And I actually am, in fact, an adulting adult and qualified to say I am, with all due respect, refusing any and all offered medical care because I do not feel that I need or want it. Thereby, if they respect your rights and liberties and think you're stable enough, legally speaking, they have to respect your wishes. They may not agree with them, but they will, because in a different circumstance, going back even further, but it was a medical situation. I had a food allergy reaction thing, and I was going to go to the hospital on my birthday in an ambulance, but I started turning around for the better, and I made the executive decision that I could just sleep it off at home and rest there. If you've ever been in a hospital bed with all the sensors and beepings and activity, you ain't going to sleep much. And on a selfish note, I didn't want to spend my birthday under those conditions, and I made a choice not to. And the ambulance crew with me, they very clearly stated they didn't agree with me, but no one made any effort to force me to go because they knew they couldn't. Bear or moose plop, whatever the hell that is. And they couldn't, because if they did, depending on how heated it got, then they opened themselves up to a whole lot of liability. They can enter into the criminal range. They try to get me in the hospital. They try to get me in the ambulance, and even if I offer passive resistance and I get banged up in the process, that is assault and battery. If I'm otherwise cognizant and they sedate me without my permission, also assault and battery. Probably falls under the application of roofies or drugging somebody, the old-fashioned way of saying slipping somebody a Mickey, which, specific to Connecticut law, I do know, is a second-degree assault charge that has a very specific classification to that, which is going to land you jail time. So, on the other side of the extreme of mandatory reporting, there's also the liability of kind of overstepping your bounds, and that's why people are able to leave a hospital in terms of what they will refer to as against medical advice, which means the doctor says you're an idiot for doing it, but you do have the right to do it anyway. That's kind of the nature of democracy. You have the right to make stupid decisions. Look at Britney Spears. But that's a whole different can of worms. We're not going to go there. However, otherwise, they do have to release you after 72 hours. The other mix of that, I don't know why I'm kind of beating on this subject, but it's there, it's on my mind, and I've run out of believer knocking to do, and I'm going to finish my thought. I'm going to check the muddy area over there for tracks and decide how much further into this thing I'm going to go, because what you have ahead of you from there is this stuff paralleling a large wetland. Not that I've ever been here before. You've actually seen me on camera here before. But the other choices, this is specific to Connecticut, but I know that Massachusetts has a similar thing. I'll break theirs down too for shits and giggles. But Connecticut has non-voluntary. That's self-explanatory. They brought you in, you're probably getting a hold. And this is the risk you run when you do something stupid like publicly declaim, I'm going to kill myself in public. Like a person who popped up in my YouTube feed did a couple years ago, and she ended up having somebody... This was the stupidity of what she did, as just like a visual aid kind of example. I don't know why I'm trusting these rocks. I usually go over there. But she posted a video, and it literally said, today's the worst day of my life. I'm going to kill myself. That was the name of the video. So that right there is a problem. She then uploaded the thing to YouTube. And then, just to round out the entire act of stupidity that she was indulging in, she hit the publish button, and that puppy was out on YouTube for public consumption. And then she made a follow-up video where she expressed her shock and surprise when somebody who was one of her subscribers called the local popo and basically expressed their concerns for her mental well-being. And from her standpoint, she forgot all about it after expounding and went over to a friend's house, I guess, and 3 hours later, she's over her friend's house, and she gets a call from her mother. The cops are here, and they'd like to talk to you about a video that you uploaded just today. And stupidly, in my opinion, she went back home rather than doing this over the phone, and she went and tried to explain to them, no, I had a bad day. She ended up in handcuffs and went to the emergency room against her will because she had done that. Luckily for her, she was there for 3 hours. She talked to the doctor, and the doctor saw that it was just somebody with an angsty day and let her go home after the whole ordeal. But the fact remains, you went through the whole ordeal in the first place. So don't do that. My own experience was even dumber than that, because all I did was oversleep. And the reason for it is very self-explanatory. It was work-related. I was working in a job at the time where you had a very small IT staff of 2 people supporting half a thousand people, and there was on-call, and the person that I worked with had been there a lot longer, had much more vacation time than I had. I'm just giving you the details to make this make more sense in terms of context. So, resultingly, with all this vacation every year, she went away for 2 weeks to a place in the Caribbean with her family, leaving me to be one person supporting half a thousand people. And on any given day with both of us there, it was never slow or boring. So when you had one person there, you were a headless chicken for 2 weeks, and on top of that, you had on call that was busy too. So my cause of my malady was basically simple to understand: sleep deprivation. But I overslept, and my kind heart-having girlfriend overreacted, in my opinion, but not for any malicious reason, and called a welfare check. But then the cops got involved, and I am the first person to tell you I don't believe that cops are the best suited individuals for handling a mental health related situation, because they go in with a completely different mentality than a social worker or somebody like this was. Because if I was awoken by some kind of a psychological oriented crisis team and we had a short conversation, that's all that would have happened. The cop, on the other hand, he didn't treat it like a wellness check. He basically assaulted me awake. He couldn't get me to wake up fast enough, so temper became an issue with him, or impatience, and he shook me awake to the point of having neck pain for the next few days. But he also slapped me once and twice. He also gave me across the face once or twice too, to wake me up. And that, now you're just talking. So this actually, just to completely deviate from the subject for a minute, this area is where a few years back I stepped in right in this area, and I was up to my freaking thighs in mud. It's a lot more overgrown this year, so that's potentially an indication that it's a lot more dry. But if you step into the stuff over there, you're going to be up to your knees in fucking mud, because I've done that before, and that was an interestingly humbling. I didn't ever feel like I was in danger, because you actually do have like a buoyancy point, and I talked about this in another video, the joy of mud safety. But basically you will hit a buoyancy point where you don't really go down any deeper than your mid-thighs. The problem is you also at that point have so much suction on your lower extremities, you can't just brute force your way out of that without losing your boot or worse. So you actually have to sit down and slowly, calmly gather yourself mentally and force yourself to go slow and get out that way. Patience is key, not panic. It's just another example of where panic is going to not help you out in any way, shape, or form. So, that being the case, don't do that. Back to mental health. So the cop assaulted me, and I don't know how long he was shaking me awake, but I was treated to getting slapped twice, which, if I recall correctly, I had the beginnings of a shiner on my right eye, or just outside my right eye's periphery. And the thing that woke me up was actually the sound of his partner saying, "Dude, stop, you're going to hurt him." And that woke me up to watch him go on to search my apartment in a definite Fourth Amendment rights violation oriented search, where he found nothing but my multivitamin, and then became agitated and decided he was going to take me to the ER for quote unquote an evaluation. So I leave it to the listener's speculation as to whether he did this because he is just going to see this through to the bitter end, and he was pissy that he didn't find any kind of substance, because that's obviously what he was looking for. Or he was doing it to cast doubt on my credibility when he knew I was probably going to file a complaint for the slapping and the assault. But it also leaves you in the mental realm of playing, what if this actually occurred? And what if that actually occurred? What would have happened? So option one, you go down there, And you're looking at being held there long enough to have a toxicology report. And since I maybe had a beer in the morning after waking up and the sun out of the pool, and that probably helped me be overly sleepy, but regardless of that, one beer. That literally is all I had. So if that comes up in a toxicology report, this is not a controlled substance and it was from earlier in the day. And you would have had the cop coming up looking stupid and a bit tyrannical when, if you're like a First Amendment auditor type, you know what the word tyrannical asshole means. If not, it means tyrannical asshole in the context of the story I'm telling. Cop went way the fuck too far. Or I would have been taken for a psych eval. Now, of course, when I told this story to my therapist at the time, and this actually is a mental health professional, she looks at me and she actually struggled to believe the story. And I'm like, you know, she looks at me and actually says, doesn't this sound a little paranoid to you? And I'm like, it would if it didn't actually happen. And like, it would, but understand it actually happened. Here we are. You either believe the story or you don't. And she looks at me and like, okay, so probably you would have had a healthy case against the cop, but also you probably would have been able to sign yourself out right then and there. Because the thing that kept me from going was I did not get belligerent with the cop. As much as you don't want to hear comply or whatever, I didn't argue I know my rights and I'm going to this and I'm going to do this if you do that. I basically challenged the logic and the absurdity of what he was trying to say. Well, we need to take you down to the ER. Why? I was sleeping. That's all it was. You had this argument go back and forth for 4 minutes, but basically what I said and the reason I didn't go was, why? I was asleep. Just looking at him like, what are you trying to accomplish now? And if I remember correctly, his argument in defense of his own thought process got weaker and weaker and weaker till finally his partner just decided it was time to go and forced the issue and de-escalated to his credit and they left. But not before leaving a lasting impression upon me for that kind of a situation. Not the funnest day I've ever had. And quite honestly, I would make the argument that when they found me asleep in my own bed, they should have just turned the fuck around and walked away and let me sleep it off, because clearly I needed to sleep. But that again falls into the argument as to whether cops have common sense or not, and I would argue against. And there's more than a few out there that I'm sure would... Hello, tadpole. No, it's a little salamander, actually. Which is a sign of a healthy ecosystem, because they're the indicator species along with frogs. The forestry science underlying that being, as I just randomly bounced through various bits of trivia, their skin is such that they can't absorb outside toxins, so if they are here and thriving, you basically don't have any, which is a good thing. If you see them dying or they have some weird growth or something like that, you have something in the ecosystem that's messing with them, and that's not good. But that is why, number one, I made it a point to understand this nature. This is the linchpin event that actually, for context, is why I have made it a point to know this kind of thing that much better, so that you know your rights in a situation like that. You may not prevent yourself from taking a ride to the hospital under some really stupid fucking circumstances. But, and just to answer the question for anyone asking, did you pursue a complaint against the cops? Any cop who's that zealous and going to push it that far is probably not above retaliation, and since he knew where I lived, I opted to choose not to. But again, to answer the next question probably occurring to you, I opted not to against my better judgment. Yes. We're back. We are about a meadow over from where we were. We stopped for a rest after going through the sloggy, wet sloppiness. Not that we're done, but we needed to take a minute and take a breather. Because believe it or not, walking through this weird sloppy terrain is, on a hot day, a wee bit more strenuous than you might think. And we're not quite done yet. But we basically need to get back over there because I'm not going to go into that today. Sorry, that today. I'm used to the gimbal camera. This one is fixed mount, so you got to kind of roll with it. And you had that one weird track that is in all likelihood a double step. That's going to probably, unless between here and the car I run into something absolutely astounding, going to be the extent of any evidence found today. But we got to come to one of my favorite places, one of my earliest Bigfooting haunts that only a few people know about. And my thoughts, since we'll cover this, on what I think Culls is talking about, the dark side of critical thinking. I'm going to take a slightly different perception of it. And I'm going to say that there is really no dark side to critical thinking. Critical thinking is essential in any scientific approach to any sort of phenomenon. You kind of have to factor in the same very thing that bothers the believer group people the most. What is this more likely to be? Bigfoot or a blurry piece of freaking Photoshop bullshit? And in the case of their group, minus AI generated stuff, 99% of it is AI generated bullshit. And yes, I derive sadistic entertainment myself. I do have some guilt in this, of being asked, why are you in this group? You say everything is bullshit. Yeah, they literally do that. And my answer, in a nutshell, is because as far as online evidence goes, 99.9% of it is freaking low-grade, believer-generated bullshit. Either by people that are ruled by loneliness, mental health issues, or they're just straight-up bullshitting hoaxers that want to have fun at people's expense. And they all suck for slightly different reasons, but the application of critical thinking to the shenanigans brought forth by these people, in my opinion, really has no dark side. Now, no offense to Mr. Culls, but I think part of the motivation of his pushing this choice of wording is there's an incentive to keep hope alive by those that are potentially perceived as quote unquote celebrity Bigfooters. And there's a fair argument that Culls falls into this category of being a celebrity Bigfooter. Enough people know who he is, and we're not going to jump right here, or am I? It depends on whether I can see where my foot begins and ends. It's as good a place as any to fucking potentially die. We're going to go over here because I don't trust that. But, and I'm not attacking Steve as an individual. There's a class of people in the Bigfooting community who fit this camp because they have a podcast. They are a vlogger. Not that I know anyone who does that. Wink, wink. Bullwinkle shit in his own bed. What the actual F? Dude. Poor form. Or they're the podcaster type, or they go to conferences and they derive a whole lot of their income from conferences. Jeff Meldrum. And I know that some people will get upset. I've actually been, I don't know if it actually got me banned, but I got yelled at on the Bigfoot forums by a former admin there, who I won't badmouth specifically due to the fact he is deceased. But he was a fan of Meldrum, and you must not badmouth the heroes and idols of others, because their fanboys will make angry noises and let you know that's not okay. But my retort is, it doesn't make me wrong. I'm not going to turn this into a Meldrum Sucks episode, though. I've actually had brief conversations with him, and he is a nice enough guy. I just think that over time he's evolved from a primatologist figure to somebody who's a regular at the conferences, and that's more of a convention celebrity type thing at that point. Weirdly, I thought I'd be getting more thirsty slogging through this stuff today, but I'm actually finding my stomach starting to growl. And I actually did have breakfast. Where do I gain the high ground and get off this sloppy shit? I'm going to go with here. Make my way back up to the dry, piney goodness of solid ground. Okay, so that was me covering some interesting terrain as we enter a new batch of differently interesting terrain. And starting to suffer from a little bit of dry mouth. Not concerned past the point I'm not going to drop or anything, but I'll just take my sweet time if I have to. I do have water at the car too, so we're good. But getting back to the dark side of critical thinking, there isn't one. I think part of Steve's mentality, and he can always correct me if I'm wrong, we have agreed to disagree in the past. It isn't the end of the world. But he does have his, I'll call it blogging persona that he has to keep an account to, because he does have a more committed approach to that effect than I do pertaining to Bigfoot. To me, it's a hobby, and if people don't think I belong in the believer groups because I'm a dirty, rotten, critical thinker, well then, oh well. Your emotional maturity of a 5-year-old is duly noted, and oh well. Life goes on. But they we're almost to the spot where we can cross over. I'm going to wrap up my thought, and then I'm just going to be on my way out, I think, unless I run into anything. So I'm just kind of feeling it. The other hike the other week was a lot more, it was muggier, but it was a lot easier to turn around. This one, once you're in there, you kind of have to walk all the way back, and you really don't have a choice in the matter. You're covering the terrain and wearing some of the forest out with you. But you can tell by the way I'm huffing and puffing. So what Steve is actually referring to with the dark side of this is Skofticism. And Skofticism, number one, has no problem with hoaxing to kind of do their neener dance to the people who believe in the matter of Bigfoot. And to me, that vacates their credibility, because you're not looking at it objectively. You're looking at it with a biased lens in the other way. And they're the polar opposite extreme of the believers. Believers believe everything. Skeptics scoff at everything. So if you're that convinced it doesn't exist, one does actually have a valid question to ask, and then why do you care? Why do you invest so much energy in that if in fact it really just doesn't matter to you? Seems a fair question. And the answer is what exactly? But the really questionable ones I have an issue with, and I know if somebody who knows both of us is going to bring this up, is going to point it out and bring a rant around in the coalition. But that's a group that is the poster child for skeptics that masquerade as something that they're not. Because that's exactly what they are. They are skeptics. And they pretend to be skeptics. But if you actually watch consistently the way that they greet the newcomers that come in to ask that somebody consider some evidence, and granted the evidence usually does look pretty bad, they are met with derision and veiled name calling that eventually, once they become agitated and get the response, i.e. they're trolled by the regulars, the full-on name calling begins, and they see what the coalition is actually all about, which is they're skeptics. They're there to make fun of the Bigfoot subject, and why they care at this point, I don't know. I mean, you have the former bookstore, I guess he's a former bookstore owner at this point. I'm not going to find any pleasure in the fact that the guy lost his business, because that's not how you do that. But he is the one who started the group, and you could go into a whole side story about that, but I don't see any value in doing that. But he is one person who always claimed his word was agnostic, and that is a load